In a room shimmering with wealth, a billionaire CEO sat perfectly still. Her sharp, guarded eyes, the eyes that had broken companies without a blink, softened. A single tear escaped, and she didn't wipe it away. What could possibly move a woman like this? The answer began just minutes earlier with a cruel joke. The crystal chandeliers blazed. Charles Denton, head of public relations, stood with a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. He spotted Walter Reed, the janitor, bent over the Steinway with a worn cloth in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles announced, his voice slicing through the chatter. "How about our janitor here gives us a tune? Show us those mop hand skills, Walter." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. Walter's young daughter, Naomi, watched from the aisle, her pencil frozen. This was meant to be a public humiliation, a way to remind a man of his place. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. Walter didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He simply walked to the piano bench. He sat, placed a folded cloth gently on the Steinway's lid, and let his fingers hover above the keys. The room held its breath. Then he pressed a single key, G. That one note would become an earthquake. It would travel from this gilded hall to a warehouse on the river, where strangers would weep and clap until their hands were sore. It would echo through a grainy phone video, reaching millions. It would unearth a hidden story of fire and loss, forcing a quiet debt to be paid, and it would spark a movement of kindness that would change an entire city. The note rang out clear and pure, slicing through the perfume-thick air. It was the kind of note that didn't just sound. It seemed to look right at you, to ask you what you were hiding. The reverberation shimmered off the marble columns, settling into the corners of the hall like dust that had been waiting for years to be disturbed. And in that fraction of a moment, Victoria Hale, the billionaire CEO who had built and broken companies with a single phone call, stopped mid-conversation. She turned her head toward the stage. Her eyes, sharp and guarded, softened for just a heartbeat. Walter lifted his hands off the keys. That one note still seemed to breathe in the air. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He just sat there, the cloth still within reach, as if deciding whether this moment would end here or become something no one in that room could forget. From somewhere deep in the audience, a champagne flute clinked against a plate. Someone cleared their throat. Charles chuckled under his breath. Walter looked down at the keys again. The camera of memory holds the shot for one long beat. The sound of that single G lingers, carrying us backward into the days before this night, into the life of a man the world had chosen not to see, until it couldn't look away. So, the most powerful stories aren't found on the grandest stages, but in the quiet dignity of everyday people. If you believe in celebrating those hidden heroes, consider subscribing to our community. We're building a space dedicated to stories that heal and inspire. Now, let the story begin. The freight elevator doors opened to the basement level of Lexington Plaza, and Walter Reed stepped out, toolbox in one hand, his old thermos in the other. The night shift was his domain. The hallways were quieter, the air cooler, the polished marble echoing only his footsteps. No one asked him for reports or memos. No one interrupted with half-smiles and networking pitches. It was just him, the building, and the tasks that kept it alive. He stopped by the supply closet, swapping the toolbox for his janitorial cart. Every item had its place. The broom handle faced the same way every time. The bottles of cleaning solution lined up like a disciplined formation. Walter didn't work sloppy even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. Down the east corridor, the lights dimmed automatically to save power. Walter's reflection followed him in the glass walls, tall but with shoulders slightly bowed, a man who didn't need to be seen to know he existed. He made his way toward the main lobby where Naomi was sitting cross-legged in one of the plush waiting chairs, sketchbook balanced on her knees. "You're supposed to be home," he said, his voice low but not unkind. She shrugged. "Mrs. Carter's babysitting again. She said it was fine." Walter raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Naomi had his stubborn streak, and some nights he didn't have the heart to fight it. "What are you working on?" he asked. She turned the sketchbook to show him a half-finished drawing of the lobby, the grand piano rendered in careful pencil strokes. "Pretty good," he said, genuinely impressed. "You got the curve of the lid right." Her eyes brightened at the praise. "It's the best part of the lobby." Before he could answer, a small figure peeked around the corner. Eli, the 8-year-old son of Rosa, one of the day-shift cleaners. He held a toy keyboard under his arm. "My mom said you play," Eli blurted out. Walter glanced at Naomi, then back at Eli. "Not anymore." "Just one thing," the boy insisted. Walter sighed, then knelt, taking the little keyboard. It was missing 2 keys, and one speaker was cracked, but it still made sound. "All right," Walter said. "First lesson, don't just hit a key because you can. Listen first, let your ear tell your hands where to go." He played a simple pattern, 3 notes, slow and steady. Eli's eyes widened. "Now you try." The boy mimicked the sequence, fumbling a bit, but getting it. Walter nodded. "Good. Remember, music's not in the fingers. It's in the pause before you play." Naomi watched silently, pencil moving again. She wasn't sketching the lobby anymore. She was drawing her father. High above the lobby, on the 42nd floor, Victoria Hale sat at the head of a long conference table, her gaze fixed on the financial projections glowing from the wall screen. Around her, the board members spoke in measured tones, the kind that masked sharp edges. "The arts initiative is a drain," said one man in a tailored navy suit. "It doesn't align with our quarterly targets." Victoria didn't reply right away. She let the silence stretch, watching them shift in their chairs. "The arts initiative," she said finally, "has been part of this company's public identity for over a decade." "And public identity doesn't pay dividends," the man countered. In the corner, Maya Ortiz scribbled notes. She had been Victoria's assistant for 3 years, long enough to read her moods in the tilt of her head or the tightening of her jaw. Right now, that jaw was rigid. The conversation moved on to other agenda items, but Maya noticed something. When one board member offhandedly mentioned auctioning the Steinway from the lobby, Victoria's eyes flicked up sharply, just for a second, before she returned to her neutral expression. After the meeting, in the private elevator, Maya ventured, "You didn't like the idea of selling the piano." Victoria gave a noncommittal shrug. "It's just an object." "An object you looked at like it said something to you," Maya said softly. Victoria didn't answer. The elevator doors opened and she stepped out into her office, its floor-to-ceiling windows pouring in the evening city light. Maya stayed behind for a moment, thinking about that flicker in Victoria's gaze. She had seen the CEO cut down billion-dollar deals without a blink, but one mention of a piano had drawn something else entirely. The next evening, Walter was in the lobby early, polishing the Steinway for the gala. The black lacquer reflected his face in curved distortion. He moved the cloth in slow, even circles, careful not to leave streaks. From behind him came the unmistakable cadence of Charles Denton's voice. "Look at that. I've never seen anyone polish something like it's a long-lost lover." A couple of staffers chuckled. Walter kept working. Charles strolled closer, hands in his pockets. "Tell me, Walter, do you even know what that thing's worth?" Walter didn't look up. A Steinway Model D, 9 feet long, 12,000 moving parts, soundboard made from Sitka spruce, slow-grown for resonance, rims from 17 layers of hard rock maple, keys used to be ivory, now they're composite, costs more than your car, and holds more stories than your column in the quarterly newsletter. The chuckles died. One of the staffers pretended to straighten a chair, suddenly avoiding eye contact. From the mezzanine above, Victoria had paused on her way out. She leaned on the railing, watching. Charles's smirk faltered. "You read that off Wikipedia?" Walter finally looked at him, calm and steady. "I read it from the wood." Victoria's lips pressed into something, That wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't cold either. Charles cleared his throat and walked away, muttering something about touchy janitors. Walter returned to his work, the cloth moving in those same slow circles. Above, Victoria lingered a moment longer before turning toward the elevators. In the corner, Naomi had been sketching the whole scene, her eyes sharp, her pencil moving quickly. She caught her father's glance and gave him the smallest of nods as if to say she'd seen it all. The day before the gala, Charles Denton lingered in the PR office long after most of his team had left. A half-empty bottle of Cabernet stood near his elbow, a glass beside it with lipstick smudges from one of the junior associates who had laughed at all his jokes earlier. The window blinds were half-drawn, cutting the skyline into uneven stripes. He scrolled lazily through the guest list on his tablet, his smirk deepening at the thought of rubbing shoulders with the city's elite. To Charles, the gala was less about fundraising and more about cementing his status as the man who knew everyone worth knowing. Then his eyes landed on a small, unassuming note in the logistics column. Janitorial coverage. W. Reed. Charles tilted his head, recalling the moment in the lobby when Walter had rattled off the Steinway's specs with surgical precision. It had unsettled him. The janitor was supposed to mumble, maybe nod, and certainly not outshine him in front of staff. That lingering discomfort twisted into something else now. An idea. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine. A harmless joke, he told himself. Something to get a laugh, to remind everyone of the order of things. Walter would play along. After all, what could he really do? "Lila," he called to his assistant, who had been halfway to the elevator. She popped her head back in. "Yes?" "Had a little entertainment before the first auction item tomorrow. I want to invite Walter to give us a piano performance. Just a minute or two. Nothing serious." Her brow furrowed. "Is he a musician?" Charles chuckled. "That's the point. It'll be funny. A bit of levity for the room." Lila hesitated but nodded, tapping it into her tablet. She wasn't paid to question his humor. Down in the basement that same evening, Walter was oiling the wheels on one of the service carts when Rosa came in with Eli in tow. She was chatting in Spanish about the floral arrangements upstairs, but Eli looked distracted. "Your boss is mean," Eli blurted out to Walter. "Eli," Rosa warned. "No, I heard him," the boy insisted. "Mr. Denton. He said you're going to play piano at the party tomorrow. He said it like when kids dare someone to eat something gross." Walter kept working on the cart, not looking up. "Where'd you hear that?" Eli glanced at his mother, then mumbled, "Upstairs." He was telling the lady with the red nails. Rosa's eyes softened. "Maybe it's nothing, Walter." Walter finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "Maybe." His tone was calm, but inside, the air had shifted. The next morning, Naomi stopped by the plaza after school. She often did on Fridays, wandering through the quieter hallways while her father worked. She liked the smell of the place. Clean polish, faint floral perfume from the lobby arrangements, the distant hum of the escalators. She was sketching near the service corridor when she heard footsteps and voices. She recognized one instantly, Charles Denton's slow, amused drawl. "Should be priceless," Charles was saying. "Can you imagine? He probably doesn't even know middle C from a coffee cup. The look on the board's face will be worth it." Another man laughed. "And if he refuses? We'll make it awkward enough that he won't. Some people don't realize when they're the joke." Naomi froze, her pencil hovering over the page. They were talking about her father, the man who had taught her how to fix a leaky faucet and how to draw the curve of a bridge without a ruler. Her stomach tightened. She waited until the voices faded, then slipped out the side door and ran down the back stairs. She found Walter in the maintenance room, refilling the mop bucket. "They're going to make fun of you," she blurted out, her cheeks flushed. "Mr. Denton, he's telling everyone you're going to play the piano so they can laugh." Walter looked at her for a long moment, the water sloshing gently in the bucket. "Where'd you hear that?" "I heard him. I heard exactly how he said it." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from outrage. "You can't let him do it." Walter set down the bucket and crouched so they were eye level. "Naomi," he said softly, "sometimes people try to make you small because they can't imagine you any other way. Doesn't mean you have to play their game." "Then don't," she urged. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the best way not to play is to play differently." That night, the gala transformed Lexington Plaza into something out of a glossy magazine spread. The lobby shimmered with crystal vases and gold-trimmed linens. A jazz trio played in the corner, their notes curling up toward the chandeliers. Waiters in black and white moved like clockwork, refilling champagne flutes before they were half empty. Walter moved quietly among them, dressed in his uniform, tending to things no one else noticed. A spill near the coat check, a bulb flickering above the side entrance. From the far side of the room, Victoria Hale stepped into the light. Her black evening gown was simple but commanding, the kind of elegance that didn't need embellishment. She spoke briefly with a cluster of donors, her laugh polite but reserved. When Charles approached, she let him lean in with whatever quip he was delivering. Her eyes, however, kept wandering toward the Steinway. As the pre-auction chatter began to swell, Charles clinked his glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "before we get to the serious business of raising money, let's have a bit of fun. You all know our friend Walter here, the man who keeps this building running smoother than a Swiss watch." Heads turned. Walter, still near the service door, straightened but didn't move. "What you may not know," Charles went on, "is that Walter has hidden talents, and we are lucky enough to have a piano here tonight. Walter, would you do us the honor of giving us a tune?" There were chuckles, some curious glances, a few whispered guesses about what might happen. Walter looked around the room, his gaze landing briefly on Naomi near the back. Her expression was tight, almost pleading. Then he saw Victoria. She was watching him, her posture still, her eyes locked on his. She gave the smallest of nods, just once. It wasn't a command. It wasn't pity. It was something else, a silent agreement between two people who understood that this moment was theirs to define. Walter took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted slightly as he crossed the room, his footsteps unhurried, his face unreadable. He reached the piano, set down the folded cloth he always carried, and rested his hands lightly above the keys. Charles grinned, clearly expecting hesitation, maybe even a clumsy joke. But Walter didn't hesitate. He pressed a single note, G, and let it ring. Victoria's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. Naomi's shoulders loosened just a little, and somewhere deep inside himself, Walter decided he wasn't here to survive this moment. He was here to own it. Walter let the single G fade until it was no longer a sound, but a memory hanging in the air. Then, without warning, his hands moved, left hand settling into the rich, resonant bass, right hand drawing out a delicate pattern like water flowing over stone. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major spilled into the room, each one precise but tender, a sound so clean it seemed to wipe away the smirk from Charles Denton's face. At first, the crowd didn't know whether to laugh or listen, but the way Walter's fingers curved over the keys, firm but unforced, the weight of each note exact, pulled them forward. Conversation stilled. Champagne flutes stopped mid-air. Somewhere in the back, a phone camera clicked on. Walter didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His world was now only the keys, the sound, and the space between notes. The melody swelled, filling every inch of the marble lobby. It was not the hesitant tinkering they had expected from a janitor. It was mastery, not just of the instrument, but of the room itself. Victoria stood utterly still, her gaze locked on the man at the Steinway. She knew Chopin. She had studied him in her youth, though she hadn't touched her own piano in years. Yet here was Walter, in a gray uniform, playing with the kind of intimacy only someone who had lived with music, not just practiced it, could summon. On the mezzanine, Naomi's face transformed. The tension in her jaw dissolved, replaced by a smile so small it seemed almost private. Her father wasn't just the janitor anymore. Not here, not now. He was something else entirely. She clutched her sketchbook tighter as if trying to hold the moment in her hands. Without breaking the flow, Walter began to shift. The transition was seamless, Chopin's elegance giving way to the rolling, syncopated rhythms of New Orleans jazz. His left hand became a walking bass, steady and deep. His right danced and teased, lifting the melody into something playful but commanding. The lobby seemed to breathe differently now, the formality cracking at the edges. A few heads began to nod with the beat. One of the waiters, standing near the back, tapped his foot before catching himself. The sound was not just music. It was defiance wrapped in joy. Every bar said, "You thought you knew me, but you didn't." Every riff dared them to keep underestimating him. Victoria's lips parted slightly, the corners trembling. She blinked once, and a tear slipped free. She didn't wipe it away. Walter's playing grew more dynamic, the bass booming just enough to be felt in the chest, the treble lines darting and weaving like fireflies. His foot tapped the pedal with measured force, each resonance layered like a conversation between past and present. And then, a flourish. His right hand climbing the keyboard, a run so clean it seemed impossible to those watching. The crowd collectively held its breath. Charles, standing stiffly near the front, looked as though he wanted to speak but couldn't find a way in. His smirk was gone, replaced by something harder to name. Irritation, maybe, or the first edge of embarrassment. Walter, however, wasn't playing for Charles. He was playing for the boy who had once believed music could change the air in a room. He was playing for Naomi, who had never seen him like this. And maybe, just maybe, he was playing for the woman watching him with tears in her eyes. The final section of the jazz progression slowed, melting into a blues-inflected cadence that seemed to sigh rather than end. Walter let the last chord linger, pressing the pedal so the harmonics shimmered into silence. The room stayed still for a beat longer than the music required. Then the applause came. Hesitant at first, like people unsure whether they were allowed to feel what they were feeling. But it grew, building into something undeniable. Naomi was on her feet, clapping so hard her sketchbook nearly fell. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She didn't care who saw her. Victoria's applause was quieter but no less sincere. She didn't look away from Walter. For the briefest moment their eyes met, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a shared understanding that this was not the end of anything, but the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Walter gave a small nod, not a bow. He picked up the folded cloth from the edge of the piano, tucking it into his pocket, and stepped away. The applause followed him as he crossed the floor toward the service hallway, the sound chasing him like an uninvited spotlight. But as he disappeared from view, the image he left behind was indelible. A man in a janitor's uniform who had, for 10 minutes, held a room of the city's wealthiest in the palm of his hand, and let them go gently. In the quiet backstage corridor, Walter leaned against the wall for a moment, closing his eyes. His hands were steady, but his chest rose and fell with a deeper breath than he'd taken in years. Naomi appeared at his side, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "You were amazing." He smiled faintly. "I just played a song." "No," she said firmly. "You told them who you are." And in that moment, Walter knew she was right. The next evening, after most of the gala's glitter had faded back into the ordinary rhythm of Lexington Plaza, Walter was in the maintenance room oiling the hinges of a stubborn service door. The echo of last night's applause still clung faintly in his memory, though he didn't dwell on it. Work had a way of grounding him. The door creaked open, and a familiar voice filled the narrow space. "You haven't changed much, Reed." Walter looked up. Standing there was Elias Carter, tall, silver at the temples, wearing a jacket that still carried the faint scent of pine and rain. Once, years ago, they had shared more than a passing friendship. Elias had been the first chair trumpet in Walter's jazz quintet, back when music was his life and the world felt bigger. "Elias," Walter said slowly, setting the oil can down. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I was at the gala," Elias replied. "Saw you play." His eyes softened. "Heard you, more like. Thought maybe I should stop pretending I didn't know where you'd ended up." Walter leaned against the workbench. "You came all this way for nostalgia?" Elias shook his head. "I came because I still remember that night." Walter's jaw tightened. "You don't have to." But Elias stepped closer. "I do. I was there, Walter. I saw you run back into that building. I saw what you carried out, and what you didn't." Walter looked away, his hands finding the edge of the workbench, fingers curling around the wood as if holding himself in place. Naomi had been wandering the back corridor looking for her father. She stopped short when she heard voices inside the maintenance room. The door was cracked just enough for her to see Elias's face, grave and deliberate. "She was already gone," Elias said quietly. "The smoke, it was everywhere. You had no business making it out alive yourself, but you tried anyway." Walter closed his eyes. The image was burned into him. Flames climbing the walls of the old apartment building. The choking weight of smoke in his lungs. The sound of her voice swallowed by the roar. And the piano, the one they had bought together, visible through the flames as he carried her photograph out. "I couldn't save her," he said finally. "You did everything a man could do," Elias said, "but you never forgave yourself. You walked away from the stage, from every gig, from all of it." Walter gave a short, humorless laugh. "And what would you have had me do? Go back to playing like nothing happened? Smile for the crowd while the person I played for was gone?" Elias's voice was steady but edged with something almost like pleading. "You think burying it made you honorable? All it did was bury you with it." In the hallway, Naomi's hand tightened on the strap of her sketchbook. She'd heard her father tell her bedtime stories about her mother, about the way she would hum along to the radio, the way her laugh could fill a room, but he had never spoken about how she died. Never about fire, or loss, or the night that seemed to have frozen part of him in place. "I didn't come to lecture you," Elias continued. "I came because when you played last night, I heard her in it. You think no one noticed, but I did. That wasn't just music, Walter. That was her. Alive. For as long as the notes lasted." Walter's voice dropped, almost to himself. "I don't know if I can keep doing that." "You can," Elias said, stepping back toward the door. "The question is, will you?" He left before Walter could answer, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hum of the building. Walter stayed where he was for a long time, the oil can still on the bench, the hinges still squeaky. He didn't notice Naomi slip away down the hall, her eyes glassy but clear. For the first time, she understood that her father's silence had not been emptiness. It had been weight. And now she carried a piece of it too, not as a burden, but as something that explained the unspoken things between them. She pressed her sketchbook to her chest and kept walking, the faint echo of Chopin and jazz threading through her mind like a language she had only just begun to learn. Victoria asked to see Walter the following afternoon, when the building breathed a quieter rhythm. She chose a small glass conference room instead of her corner office. A round table, 2 chairs, the city drifting by outside like a patient river. Walter arrived in his uniform, sleeves rolled once, the old cloth folded into his pocket. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not for entertaining donors, for reminding this place why a piano belongs in a lobby." Walter stood with his hands on the chair back, steady. "You don't need to thank me." "I do," she said. "And I want to ask you something real. The foundation started a community music route years ago. We let it thin out when budgets tightened. I want to bring it back. Classes in public, schools, small recitals at the VA, Open sessions in church basements and shelters. Nothing theatrical. Just presence. I want you to lead it." He glanced through the glass to the lobby below. Deliveries rolled in. Ties loosened. The great building performing itself. "I am a janitor." "You are the reason this building works," she said. "And you are a musician. Those truths can share a room." He took the seat. "What would it require?" 8 weeks, she answered, sliding a printed map across. Handwritten notes ringed the neighborhoods: Miss Lott's choir, Captain Hayes's Tuesday group, Pastor Green's hall. You play, you speak, you listen. We cover transport, provide small stipends for local accompanists. We keep it light and honest. He traced a finger over a school Naomi had once attended. You walked these places. I did, she said simply. Will the board approve? They approved a skeleton version. We need muscle. She held his eyes. We meet with them in an hour. You can wait outside if you prefer. Walter agreed. He stood in the corridor later, reflected faintly in the glass while voices rose behind it. It is not an efficient use of funds, said a director. Community programming does not move the market. We are not talking about markets, Victoria replied. We are talking about the city we owe. Charles Denton's voice threaded in, practiced and smooth. And optics matter. Our last event already sparked chatter because of an unscripted performance. Are we prepared to make a maintenance employee the face of the foundation? Walter's reflection did not flinch. He felt the old cloth in his pocket. The frayed edge under his thumb calmed his breathing. His name is Walter Reed, Victoria said evenly. He anchored a room without a microphone. Anecdotes are not metrics, Charles answered. What happens when the novelty fades? Are we underwriting a hobby? A low murmur circled the table. Maya Ortiz watched from the far end, her pen stilled. She read the triangle forming: budget, optics, control, and the way Charles fed all three. We can measure partnerships and attendance, Victoria said, but we cannot quantify what happens to a room when people are permitted to feel. We can either lead that or watch someone else do it better. Another director leaned forward. Suppose a journalist asks why the CEO funds a pet project while we trim departments. It is not a pet project, she said. It is written on our lobby wall. Charles smiled without light. Mission statements stretch. Quarters do not. Silence tipped the room. The chair cleared his throat. Motion to defer until next quarter. Seconded. And, Charles added lightly, we should avoid further unscripted performances in corporate spaces. The door opened. Board members flowed past Walter as if he were part of the wall. Victoria emerged last, composed, color, drained a shade. She met his eyes. Deferred. I heard, he said. I'm not finished. I know. Charles paused just long enough to place a polished hand on Walter's shoulder. Tremendous spirit at the gala. If you still have the itch, there are open mics on 9th. I can send a list. Thank you, Walter replied, voice level. Charles missed the current running under the words and walked away. Victoria glanced toward Maya. Maya's nod was minimal, a signal that meant later. Walter caught it, though he did not know what it promised. He thanked Victoria and took the elevator down. In the steel reflection he saw the uniform, the name patch, the steady rise and fall. The doors opened onto the lobby. The Steinway stood quiet under the skylight, black as still water. He passed it without a touch, the cloth warm in his palm, the decision not yet made but moving toward him like a train seen far down the track. Outside, the city exhaled through revolving doors, sirens in the distance, shoes on stone, a bus wheezing to a stop. Somewhere above, a metronome of fluorescent ballast hummed, counting time he could no longer ignore. Maya found Walter near the service stairwell where the building hummed louder than the lobby. She carried 2 paper cups and handed him one. It is tea, she said. Coffee would keep you wired. He accepted. You always bring tea to stairwells? Only when I am about to pitch something my boss would prefer I run by legal. She sat on the bottom step. The board deferred, the city did not. People are still talking about last night. If we wait a quarter, the window closes. What do you want to do? He asked. A pilot that does not need permission, she said. There is an old warehouse on the river, 2 blocks from the VA clinic. We lease part of the ground floor. It has power and working sprinklers. We can make a room in a day. String lights, folding chairs, a borrowed upright, a sign that says, "Listening room, tonight only." Walter tilted his head. You have done this before. Years ago, she said, smaller. A trumpet player and a neighborhood poet. 30 people the first week, then 60, then 100 until the landlord doubled the rent. It worked because it was small on purpose. No decks, no campaigns, just neighbors telling neighbors there is a space where sound and breath are the same thing. And your boss? She will not say yes on paper, the board would pounce, but she understands the music. Maya set the tea down. If we keep it donation only, it is not a sale. If we invite Ms. Lott's choir, it is not a formal concert. If we record on phones and let the clips float, they are witnesses, not press. He watched the steam lift from the cup. You want me to anchor it. I want you to show up, she said. Play 15 minutes of whatever tells the room the truth. Speak or not, that is yours. We will invite the VA counselor to say a few words. Let the kids sing one piece. Then ask if anyone wants to stand in the back and breathe while the piano holds them up. Her voice softened. If it only gives 30 people a quiet hour, that counts. What if 30 do not come? He asked. Then 10 come, she said, and we play anyway. He sat beside her, the paper cup warming his palms. Charles will be furious. Charles is a weather vane with a vanity mirror attached, she replied. He points wherever the wind flatters him. Walter almost laughed. You have thought about the details. I made a list, she said, pulling a folded sheet from her pocket. Chairs from the church, lights from my cousin's wedding box, upright borrowed from the senior center if we can wrangle a dolly. Stand from maintenance has a truck. We set up at 4, doors at 6:30, downbeat at 7. We end by 8:15, leave the room better than we found it. If anyone asks who organized it, the neighborhood did. He looked at the list. And if the foundation calls it unauthorized? Then they will call it effective after the clips travel. People are aching for something that feels honest. They share what helps them breathe. He fell quiet. An elevator chimed somewhere above. He reached into his pocket, thumb finding the frayed edge of the cloth. It had wiped sweat and dust and tears, keeping his hands busy when his heart needed a place to hide. Maya watched him turn the cloth once, then twice. You do not have to say yes tonight, she said. He looked up. I already did. Good, she said, standing. Tomorrow we borrow an upright and 100 folding chairs. I will text a pin. Walter rose with her. He tucked the cloth back into his pocket and a small, unguarded smile found his face. Listening room? He asked. Listening room, she said. Tonight only, until it is not. They left the stairwell in step. The lobby lights glowed through the glass like a promise. The piano sat quiet under the skylight, holding its breath for a different kind of night. Outside, the river kept time against pilings, steady and patient tonight. The next morning began with the quietest sound in Walter's apartment. A single note struck on the upright piano in the corner. The light from the kitchen window stretched across the keys like slow water. Walter sat with his shoulders hunched slightly forward, hands poised, not yet playing. He pressed a chord. The sound was good, but his left hand trembled just enough to blur the sustain. He exhaled, reset his fingers, and began again. A slow blues progression in F, rolling under his right hand's melodic line. Some notes were clear, others bent under the weight of old injury, scar tissue that never quite forgot the fire's heat. He stopped, rubbed his hand, then played a short run from memory. The run faltered midway. From the small dining table, Naomi watched quietly over her cereal bowl. She didn't say anything, but she was taking in every pause, every frown, every restart. She had never seen her father practice like this. Measured, deliberate, almost like he was rehearsing a conversation he wasn't sure he wanted to have. Walter looked up and saw her. "You're staring, Pumpkin." "Just listening," she said. "Listening's fine," he said, "but don't eat your cereal so slow it turns to paste." She smirked but kept watching. He returned to the keys, starting a different sequence. His hands moved faster now, sliding into a Chopin etude before shifting into a syncopated jazz phrase, blending the two the way only he could. It was beautiful when it worked. When it didn't, he closed his eyes, let the silence sit, and began again. The montage unfolded across the week. Walter on the apartment's upright before dawn, fingers stretching until his knuckles popped. Walter in an empty conference room at the plaza, tapping out a tricky rhythm with a metronome app on his phone. Walter in the maintenance shop during lunch, humming chord changes while tightening a bolt. The old cloth was never far, draped across the edge of the piano or tucked in his pocket, absorbing sweat when the harder passages forced his hands to fight their own hesitation. But the week wasn't only about music. On Thursday, Naomi came home from school with her backpack slung low and her shoulders hunched even lower. She dropped her books on the couch harder than usual. "Rough day?" Walter asked, turning down the burner under the skillet. "They were talking about the gala," she said without looking at him. "About you." He wiped his hands on the towel. "What about me?" "They saw the video on someone's phone. Some kid said it was cool, but Tyler and his group, they said it was funny, said you were just the janitor trying to look important." Her voice caught at the edges. "They made a joke about the cloth you carry." Walter leaned on the counter studying her face. "And what did you say?" "I told them they don't know you," she muttered. "They said they don't need to." He walked over, sat on the arm of the couch. "Naomi, you can't stop people from saying small things, but you can stop letting those small things tell you who you are." They were laughing. "They laugh because it's easier than understanding," he said. "When someone knows their worth, it makes the wrong kind of people uncomfortable. That's not your burden." She looked up at him. "Was it like that for you, when you played before?" He smiled faintly. "Sometimes. People have always been quick to decide who you are before you've played your first note. Sometimes they don't realize the song isn't for them anyway." Her brow furrowed. "Then why bother?" "Because there's always someone in the room who needs to hear it," he said. "One person who walks out feeling less alone. You play for them. You live for them. The rest? Noise." Naomi sat back, thinking it over. Walter reached into his pocket, pulled out the cloth and set it in her hands. "This is just a rag if you let it be. Or it's a piece of history, if you choose to remember what it's been through." She rubbed the fabric between her fingers. "It's soft." "It's seen more than most people will," he said. "Kind of like you." That night, after Naomi had gone to bed, Walter returned to the piano. His hands were steadier now, as if the conversation had eased something inside him. The runs were cleaner, the chords sharper. He closed his eyes, letting muscle memory and years of silence braid together into something that felt like truth. By midnight, the apartment was quiet again, except for the faint sound of a single note lingering in the air, held not by the strings, but by the resolve of the man who played it. By the time the sun dipped behind the warehouses on the riverfront, the wind carried the faint smell of rain and rust through the alleys. The old warehouse Maya had mentioned stood between two brick shells, its faded green door rolled up to reveal a warm glow inside. From the street, you could already hear the muffled hum of voices, the scrape of chairs being set into rows, the soft thud of someone tuning an upright piano. Walter stepped out of Stan's truck, the cloth in his pocket, eyes scanning the makeshift venue. Inside, strings of cafe lights zigzagged across the low beams. Folding chairs, mismatched but clean, faced a small platform built from pallets and plywood. The borrowed upright stood at center, its wood scarred but polished for the night. Mason jars with tea candles lined the edge of the platform, their flames steady despite the occasional draft. Maya was everywhere at once, checking the extension cords, adjusting a light, whispering instructions to a teenager at the door. When she spotted Walter, she gave a quick wave. "You're early," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I wanted to see the room before it filled," he replied. "It's not much, but it's enough," she said. "VA folks will start coming in after the clinic lets out. Choir's in the back warming up. We're almost ready." Walter ran his hand along the upright's keys, pressing one gently. It was a little sharp, but he smiled anyway. "This'll do." People began trickling in. Neighbors, clinic regulars, church choir members, a scattering of curious strangers who had seen a flyer or heard from a friend. The air carried that expectant hush unique to spaces not built for performance but transformed by intention. The hum of small conversations, the shuffle of feet on concrete, the clink of ceramic mugs from a makeshift refreshment table, all of it blended into a prelude. Walter took a seat in the back, letting the choir start the evening. Ms. Lott led them in 2 songs, one a spiritual, the other a simple call and response that had the room clapping in rhythm. The VA counselor spoke briefly about music as a kind of medicine. The audience listened closely, nodding, leaning in. Then Maya stepped to the microphone. "We've got one more piece for you tonight," she said. "It's from someone who doesn't usually take this kind of stage, but who's got something worth hearing. Please welcome Walter Reed." The applause was immediate, though scattered. Walter rose slowly, the cloth already in his hand. He walked to the upright, not in a hurry, as if measuring the room with each step. When he sat, he laid the cloth gently across the piano's edge, smoothed it once, then rested his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he didn't play. He just let the room breathe with him. Then, softly, he began, not with a showpiece, but with a lullaby his wife had once hummed in the kitchen. The melody was spare, almost fragile, but it carried. He transitioned seamlessly into a piece of Chopin, the left hand steady and assured, the right hand weaving delicate runs like threads of light. The warehouse seemed to shrink, the tin roof catching each note and sending it back warmer. From Chopin, he slid into a slow New Orleans jazz progression, syncopated, teasing the beat, letting the bass notes rumble in the wood. The audience stilled completely. Even the air felt suspended. In the second row, Naomi sat straighter, her eyes locked on his hands. She was seeing not just her father, but the man he had been and still was. And then, Walter shifted again. He threaded the lullaby back into the jazz, letting it rise and swell until the 2 melodies became one voice. It was the sound of grief and joy, of years survived and moments savored. When the final chord rang out, it seemed to hang longer than physics should allow. Silence followed, not the hesitant pause of polite audiences, but the kind that means no one wants to break the spell. And then, from the far side of the room, a small sound. 2 hands clapping. It was the boy from the plaza, the young son of a cleaning staffer, the one Walter had taught a few piano notes weeks ago. He stood, clapping with deliberate rhythm, his face lit with something fierce and proud. One by one, others joined in. The VA patients, the choir, Naomi, Maya, strangers who had walked in unsure and were now on their feet. The applause swelled until it was almost a physical force, bouncing off the warehouse walls. Walter just nodded once, not bowing, but acknowledging. Maya was the one who broke the moment into motion. She stepped forward, put a hand on Walter's shoulder, and whispered something the microphone didn't catch. He smiled, small, real, and stood. People crowded in afterward, asking questions, shaking his hand, telling him where they'd heard music before, but never like that. Someone handed Maya a phone already recording, saying, "This has to go online." By the next morning, the clip had traveled farther than any of them expected. It wasn't slick, just a grainy phone. Video of a man in a janitor's uniform playing an old upright in a warehouse. But the sound cut through. Comments poured in from strangers in other states, other countries. This made me cry, and I don't even know why. Reminds me of my grandfather. Worked the docks, played like an angel. More of this world, please. Local community boards picked it up, then a regional news outlet, then a national blog about human moments. The views climbed, but more importantly, the messages from people nearby poured in. Offers of space for future nights, donated instruments, food for the audience, volunteers for setup and cleanup. The next weekend, the warehouse filled again. This time, twice as many chairs, twice as many faces, and a feeling in the air that something small but steady had started. For Walter, it wasn't about the clip or the crowd. It was about the boy who had stood first, who'd recognized something worth honoring before anyone else dared to move. It was about Naomi seeing that kind of recognition and knowing it could be hers too. And as he wiped down the upright with the old cloth before the second night's closing song, Walter felt a rare thing. Certainty that the music would outlast him, carried forward in ways he couldn't plan but could trust. That night, when the applause came again, it felt like home. The week after the warehouse night, the building felt different. Receptionists smiled more easily, maintenance staff walked a little taller, and strangers paused by the lobby piano as if it had begun breathing on its own. Upstairs, the board met in the council chamber, a polished oak room where voices usually softened. Today, they carried an edge. The chair began with fiscal prudence, reallocation of funds from community arts to infrastructure upgrades. Everyone heard the subtext. The pilot program would vanish into pipes and plaster, the music silenced without anyone saying the word, cancel. Victoria Hale stood at the far end with a slim folder. She didn't sit immediately, holding the pause until murmurs faded. Charles Denton lounged midway, cufflinks catching the light, a fountain pen poised across his notepad. "Before we vote," Victoria said, "we should look at the week we just lived." She slid packets in neat pairs. Messages from partners and employees, offers of space, instruments, and recurring gifts, volunteer rosters for setup and rides, letters from veterans, counselors, night shift nurses describing what they felt when the warehouse became a listening room. Charles tapped his pen. Anecdotes. The internet loves anything for 48 hours. We are not a feelings company, we are a results company. Then count the results, she replied. 480,000 views without a marketing dollar, 136 offers of space or support, 23 local artists asking to be contracted, 2 grant makers requesting proposals this week. Customer favorability ticked up for the first time in years, not because we posted a slogan, but because we showed up. A director in Navy leaned forward. Traffic is not revenue. It is the road revenue travels on, Victoria said, and our road was closed. Someone snorted. Charles smiled as if he had planned it. Even if I grant your premise, we still have optics. The face of this program is a janitor in a gray shirt. Donors expect polish, not a mop and a lullaby. Maya, against the back wall, felt the air shift. She'd seen that move before, reduce a person to a function until vision shrinks to fit the insult. Victoria didn't look at Charles. She looked at the chair. The face, she said, is a citizen named Walter Reed. He held a room absolutely still, not with a sales pitch, not with fireworks, but with skill and humility. He didn't ask to be the face of anything. We asked him to show up. He did. The city met him halfway. Another director spoke. Risk remains. Non-traditional venues, liability, coordination. Then we write a framework, Victoria said. Pay local artists, require permits, cap at 90 minutes, no alcohol, 2 ushers trained in first aid, insurance to the door. We make structure for something that matters. Charles folded his arms. And if the next video flops? Then we served one room the way we promised, she said. Not every seed grows on camera. Silence lingered. Numbers and values collided in the air. Legal counsel noted no policy forbade compassion. The chair gave a small nod. Victoria set her folder down. I move that we maintain the arts line at current levels, authorize community nights for 2 quarters, and name Walter Reed lead instructor with appropriate compensation and safety support. Charles straightened. Substitute motion, postpone for a quarter, refer messaging to PR, return focus to galas where control exists. Discussion, the chair said. A quiet director raised his hand. My sister teaches 2nd grade in Ward 10. 2 of her students were at the warehouse. They sat still for the first time all month. I will not vote to bury that. Another director nodded. My nephew is in the VA group. He texted me at midnight, said the room felt gentle for the first time since he got home. I didn't know we could budget gentleness. Apparently, we can rent the room where it happens. Charles scoffed. Sentiment. No, the chair said, surprising himself with his firmness. Governance. We allocate toward the common good when it shows up at our door. The substitute went to vote. Only Charles's hand rose. It failed. The main motion followed, hands lifted, some quick, some with the caution of people learning a new courage. The secretary counted. The majority was clear. The motion carries, the chair said. The gavel touched wood, not a slam, but a metronome striking a new tempo. Papers shuffled, phones lit. Charles adjusted his cufflinks as if polish could mend authority. Victoria gathered her folder. As she passed him, she paused. Power isn't a mirror. It's a window. Keep checking your reflection, and you'll keep missing the people on the other side. He offered a tight smile. You'll regret tying this company to a maintenance worker. We tied ourselves to a standard, she said. He met it. Maya moved to her side, tablet open, dates, venues, permits, neighborhood captains volunteering before sunrise. The work looked ordinary. The moment did not. At the glass wall, Victoria glanced down to the lobby. The piano waited under the skylight. Sunlight slid across its lid like a warm hand. Walter wasn't in the chamber. He was downstairs changing a light over a stairwell so no one would trip. It felt right he wasn't here for the ceremony. He'd done his part. The city had done the rest. She looked back once more. Charles stood alone, staring at his phone as if it might restore gravity. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered the smirk at the gala, the pause before mockery, the way a man had been sized into a punchline. Her compassion stayed with the rooms that needed repair, not the habit that broke them. She stepped into the hall. Maya fell into stride. The corridor lights hummed softly, the kind of sound you hear only after you stop running. Somewhere in the building, a broom rested against a wall. A cloth hung drying over a sink. Small things keeping larger things upright. Let's get to work, Victoria said. Already started, Maya replied. They walked toward the elevators. The doors opened like a curtain rising on the next act. The meeting had ended hours ago, yet Walter was still in the building. He was replacing a dim bulb near the service elevator when Maya appeared in the doorway. She held a paper bag with the faint smell of fresh bread drifting out. Thought you could use dinner, she said. Walter smiled, setting his screwdriver down. That obvious, huh? Maya leaned against the wall. More obvious that you're the last one here again. She hesitated, then glanced down the hall to make sure they were alone. Walter, there's something you should know. About Naomi's surgery bill. He paused, his brow tightening. What about it? It's gone, she said softly. Cleared. Months ago. You didn't notice because the hospital adjusted the statements. You thought it was some billing error, but it wasn't. He set the light fixture into place, the quiet hum of electricity filling the gap between them. Then, who? Victoria, Maya interrupted. She paid it. Quietly. No announcements, no strings, just handled it. Walter leaned back against the wall, absorbing the weight of it. His hands, still rough from years of work, flexed at his sides. Why didn't she tell me? Maya's voice was gentle. Maybe she didn't want you to feel you owed her, or maybe she knew you'd pay it, back in your own way. Later that evening, Walter found Victoria in the lobby. The building was nearly empty. Only the low hum of the HVAC and the muffled sound of traffic filtered in. She stood by the piano, fingertips grazing the polished edge. "I hear I should be thanking you," Walter said. She didn't turn right away. "Maya talks too much." "I wouldn't call it too much," he said. "Just enough." Victoria finally faced him. Her expression was calm, almost shy. "You gave me back music," she said. "I just returned the favor." He held her gaze for a long moment, searching for something beyond the words. Gratitude settled deep in his chest, not the quick kind that fades after a handshake, but the kind that changes how a man walks into a room. "I didn't think anyone noticed," he admitted. "I noticed," she said simply. "So did everyone in that warehouse." They stood there, two people bound not by charity or obligation, but by an unspoken understanding that sometimes the smallest acts, a song, a payment made in silence, carry the loudest echoes. Walter finally nodded. "Guess we're even then." Victoria smiled faintly. "Not even, just balanced." And with that, she stepped away from the piano, leaving him alone with the instrument, the room, and the knowledge that the ledger between them wasn't measured in dollars or favors, but in the quiet restoration of something each thought they had lost forever. The evening had the kind of stillness that made every sound matter. Inside Lexington Hall, warm light washed over rows of mismatched chairs, each filled with someone who belonged to this neighborhood, whether they'd lived here for 50 years or just moved in last month. The Steinway sat at the front, its black lacquer gleaming under soft spotlights, the same piano that had been both a stage and a battleground weeks before. Walter stood in the wings, hands clasped loosely in front of him, feeling the grain of the old cleaning cloth folded in his pocket. Maya leaned on the wall beside him, peeking out at the crowd. "Hoi, Hop Kong?" she asked quietly. Walter's gaze drifted past the side curtain. He saw faces. Eli, the boy from the plaza, fidgeting in the second row, Miss Lott's choir in matching scarves, a group of hospital nurses, a veteran in his pressed jacket. And near the aisle, Naomi, flipping through her sketchbook, unaware he was watching. "Not like last time," he murmured. "Last time, I was proving something. Tonight I know who I'm playing for." Maya smiled. "Then go give it to them." The choir finished their opening song and a wave of applause filled the room. Maya stepped out to the mic. "Tonight," she said, "the piano belongs to the neighborhood, and the man who will play it has been keeping music alive in quieter ways than most of us will ever know. Please welcome Walter Price." Walter walked out unhurried. The applause rose, then softened, settling into an expectant hush. He set the cloth on the Steinway's edge, adjusted the bench by a single inch, and let his hands rest on his knees for a breath before touching the keys. The first chord of Second Sunrise was low and warm, a door opening. He built the introduction in careful layers, the left hand grounding the melody in a slow, swaying blues, the right hand stepping into lighter, jazz-tinged phrases. The notes moved like morning fog lifting over a river. The music traveled through seasons of emotion, a minor progression pressed in like winter, the kind of cold that makes breath visible. Then a sudden run in the upper register burst through like the green of early spring. The tempo shifted into a gentle summer sway, chords wide and generous. In the bridge he let a thread of his wife's lullaby weave through the melody, not for show, but as an unspoken truth. Audience members leaned forward, eyes drawn to his hands. Victoria sat perfectly still, one palm flat on her knee as if grounding herself. In the back, Charles stood alone. But there was no smirk on his face, only an odd stillness. An awareness, perhaps, that for the first time, the room's power wasn't his to touch. Walter's playing deepened, the bass line pulsing with quiet strength, treble line spiraling upward like light over water. Then came a passage of sharp staccatos, Anger's season, before easing into a slow arpeggio of acceptance. Each chord seemed to carry weight but release it in the same moment. As the piece reached its midpoint, he stopped, not abruptly, but like a sentence pausing before the most important word. His voice, low but steady, filled the hall. The sun doesn't wait for us to be ready. It rises, and some days we rise with it. Some days we don't. Either way, there is light. Then back to the keys. No one shifted in their seats. Even the air felt still. The final sequence blended blues grit with the lift of gospel, building toward a conclusion that wasn't triumph, but peace. The last chord lingered under the pedal, then faded. Silence stood upright. And then, applause, rising, swelling, people on their feet. Walter didn't bow. He reached for the cloth, wiped the Steinway's surface, folded it once, then again. Naomi stepped into the aisle, sketchbook closed. "Dad," she said, voice carrying clearly. "For you?" He took the page she handed him. On it, in bold, tender lines, was himself at the Steinway. And beside him, a woman, listening, his wife, Naomi's mother, drawn not in grief, but in presence. Evening light in her hair, eyes soft as though the music was still between them. A murmur moved through the hall. Even strangers understood. Walter's hand shook slightly as he traced the edge of the drawing. He looked at Naomi. "Thank you," he said, the words landing with the weight of all that wasn't spoken. "My daughter," he told the audience, "drew the sound I couldn't write. This is what happens when community listens. We hear more than one voice." From the back, the veteran stepped forward, his movements slow but sure. He placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply. Walter nodded once in return. Eli was next, darting up to the stage. "Mr. Walter, you made the room be quiet." The boy grinned like it was the rarest magic trick. Walter squeezed his hand, answering only with a smile. He set Naomi's drawing on the music stand, adjusted the light so it illuminated her mother's face. "One more," he said. The encore began with the lullaby, soft as breath. He folded Second Sunrise back into it, not as memory, but as companionship. The choir hummed a single note beneath him. Eli began clapping on the offbeats. Naomi laughed quietly and let him keep the rhythm. When it ended, there was no explosive applause, just the kind of ovation that comes from people who have been changed. Some stood, others sat, heads bowed. A few hugged the person next to them. Walter closed the lid gently, laying his palm flat upon it, the hand of respect. The gesture drew a new round of applause, this one lighter but full of affection. As the hall slowly emptied, people stopped to speak. The veteran clasped his hand again. A nurse thanked him for the quiet. Miss Lott promised the choir would be back next week. Maya was already taking down names on a clipboard for future events. Walter found Naomi near the exit, still holding the drawing. He glanced once more at the Steinway, now standing alone under the dimmed lights. Then he and Naomi stepped out into the cool night, the city humming in steady rhythm around them. He didn't need to say it, but he did anyway, quietly as they walked. "We rose with it tonight." Naomi slipped her hand into his. "Yeah, Dad, we did." The ovation did not thin. It found a rhythm, palms meeting palms in a steady beat that felt like breathing aloud. People clapped not to end the night, but to carry it forward. The hall answered with a soft, resonant thrum. Walter stood beside the Steinway, the old cloth folded on the lid like a flag at rest, and let the cadence wash over him. He looked across the front row to Victoria. She rose, and for a heartbeat the two of them were the only stillness in the room. He stepped down from the platform and crossed the small distance. The applause kept time for their meeting. She did not reach for a handshake. She simply nodded, eyes bright with the kind of pride that does not need ownership. Walter's voice was low enough to belong to the moment, strong enough to carry. "We're just getting started," he said. Victoria's smile answered without correction. Maya lifted a clipboard and caught Walter's eye. 3 churches had signed up, 2 schools, a shelter willing to host on Thursdays. The choir hummed a gentle tonic as people began to sway. Eli clapped on 2 and 4, grinning as if he had discovered the secret of the room. Walter returned to the piano. He laid his palm flat on the lid, the hand of respect, and smoothed the cloth once more. The symbol mattered. It said the work of hands and the work of heart had finally met in the same place. He left the cloth where music could keep it safe. The crowd began to drift, not away but outward. Hugs at the doors, thank yous whispered to ushers, a veteran's quiet salute from the aisle. Walter looked back to Victoria one last time and lifted his chin in a promise. Tomorrow would come early. The city would need chairs moved, permits signed, kids welcomed. This, finally, was the right kind of labor. Lights lowered in the hall until the Steinway held the last warm glow. The camera lingered on the folded cloth, on the name stitched over Walter's pocket, on Naomi's drawing where a mother listens forever. The rhythm of clapping softened into the rhythm of breath. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read each one with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story.